Iran and Israel have reached a ceasefire. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov stated that Ukraine is pleading and begging Russia to stop its offensive. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry did not respond to Russia's claims, indicating that Russia currently holds the battlefield initiative and that Zelenskyy genuinely wants a ceasefire. In fact, Ukraine has fought well in recent years. If the U.S. continued its aid, Zelenskyy would have no reason to seek a ceasefire. However, after Trump took office, he repeatedly humiliated Zelenskyy and even suspended aid at one point. Zelenskyy could tolerate these, but Israel's series of military actions in the Middle East nearly depleted the U.S. weapon stockpiles. Combined with China's rare earth sanctions against the U.S., the American arms industry is now struggling to keep up. Not only Ukraine, but even the U.S. itself lacks sufficient weapons. Most of the arms Taiwan purchased from the U.S. have been severely delayed. The U.S. strategy prioritizes Israel as its closest ally, ensuring Israel is well supplied even at the expense of its own resources. Ukraine, like India, is treated as a stray dog picked up from the roadside, used when needed and discarded when no longer valuable. Ukraine's current situation is entirely due to Zelenskyy. This clown, living next to Russia, the giant polar bear. Ukraine should have learned to swallow its pride and improve relations with Russia, even if bullied. During the Soviet era, the two nations were close allies. Soviet leaders transferred Crimea to Ukraine, developed Ukraine as a core industrial zone, and made it the Soviet Union's largest breadbasket. Except for Stalin, the tyrant, Soviet leaders did little to wrong Ukraine. After the Soviet Union's collapse, Ukraine inherited significant Soviet industries, such as shipbuilding and aviation, along with superior agricultural conditions and rich mineral reserves. Honestly, with competent leadership, Ukrainians could have lived better than Russians. Unfortunately, Ukrainians were plagued by deceitful and corrupt politicians who, for their own gain, constantly stirred up issues to incite hatred between Ukrainians and Russians. After U.S. intervention, Ukraine underwent a color revolution, completely severed ties with Russia, and moved toward confrontation and war. Zelenskyy, the clown, bears 90% of the responsibility. He showed astonishing boldness at the wrong moments, provoking Russia and dragging his nation and people into war. Although Ukraine fought bravely and avoided national extinction, it has become a ruin. Countless young lives have been lost on the battlefield. Many have fled. The economy has collapsed. Infrastructure has been destroyed, and the country is burdened with massive foreign debt. Ukraine has mortgaged all its valuable assets to U.S. conglomerates, and future generations of Ukrainians will have to work hard to repay these debts. Yes, Ukraine inflicted heavy losses on Russia, but so what? Russia's wounds only benefited the U.S., while Ukraine and all of Europe are the losers. Given Russia's vast size, it has not been completely defeated and remains a constant threat to Europe. By making itself Russia's primary enemy, isn't Ukraine foolish enough? To be honest, my view of Zelenskyy has changed significantly since he showed willingness to negotiate a ceasefire. It is easy to make mistakes, but admitting and correcting them requires great courage. A ceasefire means a lot for Zelenskyy. He will likely exit Ukrainian politics entirely, face potential retribution, and find exile as his most reliable option. He cannot explain such immense losses to Ukrainians, bring back lost lives, mend broken families, manage Ukraine's enormous debt, or withstand opposition attacks. He must know he is merely a tool for the U.S., and the U.S. attitude toward tools is to discard them when they lose value. Modi served as the U.S.'s watchdog for 11 years, yet the U.S. abandoned him without hesitation. Not only did the U.S. withhold military support for India, but American media also published articles mocking the Indian government's fabricated military achievements. Worse still, the U.S. plans to impose tariffs on India because Modi holds no leverage. For Trump and U.S. politicians, India's status is lower than Ukraine's. Ukraine is at least a European nation, while India is a place Trump, Vance, Musk, and other American elites have no interest in visiting. However, Ukraine has truly reached a point of exhaustion. To preserve the Ukrainian nation, it cannot let all its men die on the battlefield. Continuing the fight would force Zelenskyy to mobilize 18-year-old or even 16-year-old boys, which is entirely unworthy for national pride. I hope Zelenskyy can see clearly that he is just a U.S. tool, one that has lost its value. Like Modi, with no cards left to play. Russia cannot be defeated by Ukraine. Even Nazi Germany failed to do so, let alone Ukraine. At this moment, Zelenskyy must take responsibility, pay for his mistaken decisions, endure all insults and criticism, and secure a ceasefire agreement to preserve some hope for Ukraine. I want to say to Zelenskyy, history will criticize your arrogance, ignorance, and hubris, but it will also remember your leadership in Ukraine's brave resistance against Russia, even if it was futile. Compared to most ordinary people who fade into obscurity, you have left a bold mark in history. After all, you were the first to punch Putin, the great emperor, and leave him battered. Your most important task now is to ensure the West, especially Europe, provides more compensation for Ukraine. Don't be shy. Tell those European nations hiding in safety that if they do not provide sufficient aid, you will surrender to Putin and allow Russia to deploy missiles and fighter jets on Ukraine's western border. European politicians have claimed they will never abandon Ukraine and will always stand with its people. Now is the time for them to honor their promises. Europe must bear over 80% of Ukraine's debt to the US and help repay it, or face the consequences. Trump has said Europeans must pay for their own security. If Trump can demand this, Ukraine has the right to do the same. Ukraine's debt is a burden that will take generations of Ukrainians to repay. But if all of Europe shares the cost, it becomes a manageable sum. If Europeans fail to support Ukraine with actions and insist on making Ukrainians suffer, Ukraine's president must make Europe taste suffering too. If Europe and the US treat Ukraine as a tool to be discarded after use, Ukraine must maximize its value as a tool. If Europe does not want it, let Russia take it. The US and Russia are separated by the beautiful Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, but Europe is right at Russia's doorstep. Let Europeans think carefully about this issue, but give them only one chance to respond.